Welcome to Grid Talk and happy Pride Month. My name is Ruby Price, and today we're here to preview the 2025 Canadian Grand Prix. Joining me today, we have Grid Talk's very own George Howson
Afternoon.
and Louis Edwards.
Hello.
So let's get into this straight away. The Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve has been home to controversy, to glory, to a mixture of wildlife from seagulls to groundhogs, but it has produced some memorable moments. George, why don't you kick us off with some of your memories of Montreal?
Oh, the Seagulls. I actually forgot about the Seagulls till you said that. Vettel with his Seagulls moment in 2018, I think that was. That was hilarious. But yeah, Canada's seen some absolutely iconic moments over the years, going way back all the way to the 70s when it first joined the Formula One calendar. He had Gilles Villeneuve becoming the first Canadian to win a Grand Prix in Formula One in Canada. You had Nigel Mansell stalling his car at the hairpin when he was like a minute clear of the pack and losing out to Nelson Piquet's great rival. That was a rather annoying one for our Nige. Hamilton's won plenty of times here as well over the years. I think his first win here was in 2007. Yeah, it's been home to a really a good amount of races over the years, and of course the longest Grand Prix ever, 2011. It'll never be beaten. They put a limit of 4 hours now on Grand Prix these days, but yeah, Jenson Button winning it in the last corner, pretty much last lap over Sebastian Vettel. That was one of the most iconic moments for me. So I'm very glad to be going back to Canada this weekend.
Yeah, Canada 2011 is always something that always springs to mind when I think of this circuit as well. And not just because of how long that race was, but because I actually missed it, the second half of it, because I left it recording and then they obviously changed channels that they were broadcasting on. And, back then you couldn't just Google Canadian Grand Prix and then find some dodgy website to watch it back on, which I've never done in my life, I promise you that. But Louis, how about yourself? Any memorable moments from Canada?
Yeah, I mean, I have many memorable moments from Canada because Canada is one of those races that always throws up a good race pretty much every year. It's a track with changeable weather, ample overtaking opportunities, despite the fact it's considered a street circuit. I don't really see it as a street circuit personally, but it technically is one. But my very core memory of Canada is of the big debacle between Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton, where Vettel and Hamilton had a little incident. Vettel was given a penalty and was robbed of the win. He went back into the pit lane and switched the boards around, putting the P1 board in front of his car and P2 in front of Lewis. It's an iconic moment from Sebastian Vettel, along with the Seagulls, of course, as well, obviously. But yeah, Canada is always a great race. It throws up some great results. People getting their first wins. Daniel Ricciardo got his first F1 win there. Lewis Hamilton, I believe it was his first F1 win was at Canada. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, I've been watching back the highlights from the last couple of years, and in my mind, I seem to remember Canada being not necessarily a bit duller in the last couple of seasons, but like not necessarily being eventful. But then I was watching back, and 2024 was just absolute carnage with the weather. 2023 had so many incidents as well. 2022 finishes off with a 20 lap sprint race between Carlos Sainz and Max Verstappen. And yeah, Canada, like it's got a bad rap, but I think it doesn't deserve it almost. It always throws a spanner in the works. It's historic and it's got plenty of, memories that we can all recall back. But, let's actually have a look at this weekend ahead. So, as we head into round 10 of the season, the story of the season is that we're living in a McLaren head-to-head fight for the championship. Lando Norris is sat on 176 points, with his junior teammate leading the way on 186. George, the team are well clear in the constructors, so McLaren's main headache is really just managing their two drivers. How do you see this playing out in Canada?
Well, it's going to be interesting for sure. I mean, for the majority of the races last season, Norris did beat Piastri, but Piastri's been absolutely flying. I mean, I heard a stat quite recently that said that Oscar Piastri, if he wins this weekend, will match Charles Leclerc's total for Grand Prix victories in his entire career, which shows quite a few things about Ferrari and Charles Leclerc, but also tells you how good. And yeah, would also pass Lando Norris as well. Thank you, Ruby. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting between these two because you've got a relative cool head on cool shoulders in Oscar Piastri, people calling him the second coming of the Iceman. And I can see why with how he's just been sweeping up. And so far, we've not really had a big battle between the two of them. I mean, we kind of had one in in Japan, a good few weeks ago. That wasn't even for the win though. That was just them two battling to try and be the closest to Max Verstappen. We've not seen them battle yet properly for the lead. There's always been something that's happened, and until that happens, McLaren's job is relatively easy. But until it happens, you don't know how they're going to act. But for what it's worth, with how they both are as drivers, there's no real kind of dirty streak in either of them. We've not seen either of them when it comes to that do something like that. So I think that it's going to be close between these two. They clearly are the fastest cars. People were saying before the Spanish Grand Prix, oh, the flexi wing rule, McLaren are going to be crippled. They're going to be well down the order. If anything, it made them quicker. That was their best weekend of the year. They were miles clear in qualifying. So I think it's going to be more of the same at the very front in terms of the two McLarens. But who's going to come out on top? We don't know. And that is enough to make it a very entertaining season, particularly if you're a McLaren fan.
Yeah, I think in Spain we actually had the biggest gap in qualifying that we've actually had all season. And it's like these rules were introduced to try and bring the field back closer together. And, McLaren had run the front wing that they used in Spain before Spain. So it's just a scenario of this wasn't what was making McLaren good. So, FIA maybe stop trying to pull the leaders back a little bit. But yeah, like as you say, there seems to be a lot of respect between their two competitors. They both want to win it. Obviously, only one will get to do so. But so far, it's been very clean between the two of them. Louis, at this point in the 2024 season, Red Bull were leading the charge with 301 points. They're currently sat in fourth in the constructors with just 144. That's over 200 behind McLaren, and they have just two wins to their name. What is going on with them? Have they lost their way? Because this is not the almost impervious racing outfit we've seen from the last few years.
Yeah, it's a difficult one to sort of tell with Red Bull because you would expect them just to kind of continue the momentum. But honestly, I think what has happened is they've just hit a hard cap on their development. I think they've really just developed this car as much as it would go, and the other teams have managed to find a way to develop their car to overtake, and Red Bull have still kind of stuck at this ceiling where their car is still fast and is still able to compete, but they're not able to find that next step that will put them back ahead of everyone else. I think it's kind of the issue that they've hit. And this kind of last year, kind of last 16 months at Red Bull has been an absolute nightmare. It's not been great with stuff within the team, drivers, leadership. And, Checo wasn't doing a half bad job at the start of last season. He actually got a podium, which can't be said for any of the two Red Bull drivers that we've seen take that second seat already this season. Lawson getting the boot incredibly quickly and Yuki being given time that maybe Lawson should also have been given. But yeah, it's a hard time for Red Bull, and when there's clearly a lot of dissatisfaction, you hear it from Max a lot. It's clear that Red Bull are really just scrambling at the moment and trying to make sure that they have a car that is competitive. But I just don't think they have those upgrades coming that's inspiring that much confidence to that they're going to be back on top anytime soon. And it's just allowing McLaren, well, it's allowing McLaren to run away with it, and B, it's just allowing them to be completely swallowed up by the likes of Ferrari, who have been horrifically inconsistent, and Mercedes, who are steadily finding their feet this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get on to Ferrari and Mercedes a little bit later. But one thing that you can't knock from Red Bull is how quickly they are capable of turning a disaster on a Friday into at least something salvageable on a Saturday. We've seen it time and time again this season. They show up on the Friday and just don't look like they're actually at the races. But, through communication back to their factory in Milton Keynes and just general, teamwork and stuff, they've been able to at least get one of their cars to deliver on the Saturday, which is arguably what's kept them in fourth, I would say, at this point. But it's, you need to be starting these weekends off on the right foot, otherwise you're never quite really in the swing of things. But George, as we go into Canada, Obviously, last race weekend, I should say, Max Verstappen had a highly criticised incident with George Russell, leaving him with 11 out of the 12 penalty points needed for a race ban. Two of those points will disappear after June because two of them were picked up for the incident in Austria last season. But it does leave them in a precarious position where a single penalty point could cost their star driver a race, maybe even at Red Bull's home circuit in Austria. First of all, do you think it's likely we'll see a race ban for Max? And secondly, if that were to happen, what do Red Bull do in that scenario? Because we've already seen them rip through their junior drivers this season alone.
Yeah, that's the thing. Red Bull are kind of scrambling at the moment. They have put in an application to get a super license exemption for Arvid Lindblad, who is in Formula 2 at the moment, doing a really good job in fairness, but he's only 17 years old, so they would need to get an exemption for him. Apparently, that's going to be approved this week by the FIA. If it doesn't happen, then the logical kind of step really would be to get Isaac Hadjar in the Red Bull car, give him a go, and then to replace him at Racing Bulls, you'd likely see someone like a Yuma Iwasa or someone like that take his place. But yeah, with Max, I mean, you would think that someone who has won four world championships over 60 races would be able to keep his cool for a couple of races. But the problem is that when the red mist descends with Max, he absolutely loses the plot. Max, a lot of the time with Max's moves, they're very calculated. Like he does things that a lot of people may perceive to be dirty, to be unsportsmanlike, but he does it in a way that the rule book says is fine. Like the person who wins the right to the corner. A lot of them moves that people would say, "Oh, you shouldn't drive like that." Well, the rule book says I can do it like this, and I've done it like this, so it's fine. He knows what he's doing. But there's some times when he just loses his cool, and we saw it at Hungary last year. We saw it at Mexico last year as well, and we obviously saw it at Spain this year too. So it's all about if something happens like that. If Max just drives and does his thing and gets a good result, he'll be fine. He'll be absolutely fine. But it's just if he loses his cool. And when he loses control like that, anything can happen. All bets are off. And yeah, around Canada where we see a lot of craziness happen, around Red Bull Ring where we see a lot of craziness happen, and it's very possible. It doesn't take a lot to get one penalty point on your license. It could be for something really benign. I mean, he never should have got a penalty for it anyway, but his penalty for blocking George Russell in qualifying in Qatar last year, I think that earned him a penalty point. So it has to be something, it can be something incredibly minor. So he's got to be really careful now because the FAA have shown they will do it. The FAA have shown that they will ban a driver for a race. They did it with Magnussen last year. Nobody thought they'd do it. I didn't think they'd do it. I didn't think they'd actually commit to their rules. I thought they'd kind of skirt around it and, avoid it at all costs, but they did it. And if Max does anything like what he did to George Russell last time out in Barcelona, he's gone. He's going to get a race ban. So yeah, we've not seen anything like this for a very long time. Not since the days of Michael Schumacher have we seen a driver get banned, a champion get banned, I should say. It'd be unprecedented, but it's very possible.
Yeah, and going back to what you were saying about Kevin Magnussen, it did seem for half of last season that the FIA were doing everything they could to not give him a penalty point for incidents that he was getting penalties for. And then obviously it did, culminate in the incident that cost him the position in Azerbaijan, I want to say. Yes, because it was on Grill the Grid Talk, a cheeky plug there. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I think Max is going to have to obviously toe the line. As you say, he does drive to the regulations, even if that means putting his car just in the prime position, just as the apex is coming up. But those are the rules. And if you drive to the rules, the penalties don't need to be applied. But, another team let's talk about, Louis. We already kind of led to them earlier, but Ferrari. If you asked about a team underperforming and having a very underwhelming campaign with neither driver able to really get on top of the car, you wouldn't expect that team to be in P2. But with Ferrari, that is the case. And Louis, given the troubles they have been having, what on earth is going on at Ferrari?
I feel like it's the same at Rebel. There's a lot. I think it's not a nice simple answer with what's going on at Ferrari. It's a case of they made a lot of changes over the winter, while the likes of Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren all kept the same foundation of car coming from 2024 to 2025 and kind of built on it and tried to, improve on it. Ferrari kind of ripped up the plans and went, right, let's start again, without really much forethought for 2026. They was like, right, okay, it's our time to shine. We've got Lewis coming into the car, we've got Charles, you've got the best driver lineup on the grid. Let's give them a car that's worthy of a world championship. And in the Ferrari of Ferrari ways, that has been since really like 2009. They did a terrible job of it, and it's backfired somewhat. And we've seen glimpses of when Ferrari can be competitive. Charles in Monaco was an example. Lewis got his sprint race in China. So there've been these moments where Ferrari have been able to score big, and that's what's kept them in the running. And that's ultimately is the reason why they're in P2 now. Red Bull are playing the game with one hand tied behind their back. Mercedes hit and miss, and when their reliability has failed them, unfortunately, it's cost them big. See Antonelli. So yeah, it's just been kind of a nice stay under the radar and let's try and score as many points as we can. And yeah, it's clear that the drivers aren't particularly happy with the car. Charles and Lewis both often mention it during a race weekend. I don't think we've had a race weekend where they haven't said something about the car and or strategy and or just general whining and complaining from both of them. So yeah, there's still definitely a lot to be worked on, but I think they'll be somewhat go, oh, we're P2. Oh, that's great. That's great. And then kind of try and see how long they can hold on for it. But you never know. Canada might also prove to be a great weekend for them.
Yeah, there's an Italian phrase book somewhere in the Ferrari like motorhome that's just been left aside that just says how to fix your car, or maybe it's like the Italian translation of Adrian Newey's autobiography. Just trying to drop hints somewhere from both the drivers to the team because neither of them have been happy at all, even on sprint win weekends. Still weren't happy with the car. Podiums in Monaco, still not happy with the car. There's just something not clicking at Ferrari. And as you say, maybe it's just gone back to the fact that, the form team from the end of last season decided to go for a brand new concept for the year before a big, massive change to the aero regulations. But hey ho, I'm not an F1 designer. Ferrari, maybe they're onto something. Maybe they'll get a win by the end of the season. Probably not. But, I'm not even, I'm so annoyed at Ferrari, I'm not even going to do a pun for this. If you enjoy this podcast, we'd love it if you could take 5 minutes to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And if you're listening and aren't currently subscribed to the channel, consider helping us out with a like and a subscribe. And you could always support us on Patreon as well for further behind the scenes content and an exclusive podcast. We give you more than Ferrari give their drivers. There we go. I looped it back to Formula One. Now, let's talk about Alpine, George. After Nico Hulkenberg's incredible result for Sauber in Spain, Alpine are now firmly last. The $20 million reserve driver Franco Colapinto was brought in to replace pointless Jack Doohan and has had, frankly, a disappointing run of results so far. Pierre Gasly sounds like he would rather be anywhere else, and they've got convicted cheat and all-round slimeball Flavio Briatore in charge. Is 2025 a write-off for Alpine, and do they have any hope left in L Plan?
Oh, what an absolute glorious tee up that was there, Ruby. Thank you very much for that. That's perfect. Yeah, yeah, Flavio was brought in to get results. I'm sure he said something like that, but the results are just not getting better. Yeah, they're literally bottom of the constructors. Hulkenberg sending them to the bottom. It's absolutely humiliating. Yeah, for what it's worth, I don't think they have the worst car on the grid. I think the Sauber is the worst car, but they're clearly getting the worst results out of that car. Even Gasly, in his hands, he can only do so much, and it's clearly not enough. The engine isn't helping them. They said, Flavio's come out and said the engine's costing them 2-3 tenths a lap, but clearly there's problems in the car as well because they're losing more than 2 or 3 tenths per lap on average. Like we spoke about on our Beyond the Grid Talk Patreon podcast a little bit ago, they're in Formula One to win. They are the French national team of Formula One. The French public literally owns part of Renault, which obviously owns Alpine. So they have a vested interest in this. We talk about Ferrari's failings and how inconsistent they've been, and they have been, of course, but they're still second in the constructors. The national team of Italy, but the national team of France is just really just useless right now. They are doing so bad. Luca Di Maio, the the president or the leader of or the CEO, whatever, of Renault has had to publicly come out and say, we are not going to leave Formula One, Wolf of Wall Street style. We're not leaving. I'm not leaving. I mean, everyone's saying they should leave, but from a business point of view, it makes perfect sense for them to stay because Formula One is booming right now in terms of its popularity. Even the worst team on the grid, Alpine, their value will be going up. So, from a financial point of view, they have every reason to stay. But from a sporting point of view, it's just not working for them. We've not seen a market improvement from Franco Colapinto. In the long run, I think he will be better than Jack Doohan. I do rate him more highly than Jack Doohan, but he's coming partway through the season, and it's so difficult to come in partway through the season and get a good result. He did that at Williams last year, obviously, but that Alpine is apparently very difficult to drive, not unlike what we see with the Red Bull. It's probably only really designed around Pierre Gasly and his driving style, and Colapinto struggling to get on top of it. He's crashing the car every now and again. It's kind of like, where do they go from here? Are they going to bring someone else in? Are they going to bring in one of their other 20 reserve drivers at some point to try and improve things? Well, it's not going to work because even their experienced driver, Pierre Gasly, who is a Grand Prix winner, lest we forget, cannot get great results out of that car. So for them to be bottom of the constructors behind Haas, behind the likes of Sauber or much smaller teams, frankly, it's humiliating, but it's Alpine. If they were desperate enough to hire the guy that destroyed their Renault outfit back in the late 2000s and the guy that almost destroyed the sport itself, then they're clearly out of ideas.
Yeah, I was thinking just before we were doing this podcast as well. A few years ago, McLaren and Alpine were fighting over, I think, P4 in the constructors' title. One of those teams is now firmly the championship, elect almost. And the other team are at the other side of the constructors' championship fight. So it just shows like the pivot point between these two teams and how alternative universe Alpine could be leading the way, but that we're not living in a fantasy here, unfortunately. And speaking of teams living in fantasies, Aston Martin had to withdraw Lance Stroll midway through the Spanish Grand Prix weekend due to complications with his wrist surgery from 2023. It was reported he'd been feeling pain for several weeks prior to the event, and I've already ranted enough about Aston's duty of care for their drivers. But Louis, it sounds like Lance might just be back in the car for his home race. After his veteran teammate scored his first points of the season last time out, can you see Aston's fortunes taking an upwards turn?
Well, Lance has been driving in pain for, a few weeks, and we've been watching him in pain since 2016. So it's a balancing act. But I mean, Aston Martin, they've been a very strange team this season. They started off like in preseason testing, like in the most horrible way, and then like in Australia, Lance, managed to get some points, and it was just like, okay, what the hell's going on? And Stroll has been able to pick up points here and there, but he picked up points in Australia as well, and then also got sprint in Miami, if I'm not mistaken. Someone's gonna have to fact check me on that. He definitely got some points somewhere else since the start of the season. But Fernando has been incredibly unlucky this season. He's had 3 DNFs. He's finished 11th in pretty much every other race until he finally managed to get the points in Spain. And to be honest, with Fernando, a lot of people have really been incredibly critical on Fernando this season, due to his lack of point scoring. But I think we're now starting to see Fernando be backed into a corner with all this pressure. And, when you have someone of a caliber like Fernando Alonso, the same that would happen with Max or Lewis or, any of these sort of top drivers in the sport, we start to see him absolutely go for it. And that's what we can see. There's so much drive in Fernando's driving at the moment. So I think, is definitely someone to look out for. I'm not expecting Q3s, but I'm definitely expecting at least Fernando to be competitive within Q2. Lance is going to be a call of how well his surgery has gone. I mean, when he broke the things, he got 6th place. It was incredible. And I did suggest on the podcast, I think then he should break his wrist more often. He might be a bit more consistent. So You never know. He might get a podium in this one now that he's got some surgery.
Come on,
Who
Louis,
knew it was
save it
his?
for the bold predictions later on.
It was his wrists all along. It was what was stopping Lance from being a bed. He's got to turn the wheel with him. He's finally unlocked the ability to like turn out the way of other drivers. So the wall. So I think things are going to look up for Aston Martin. I think there's such a scramble in this midfield, and it's so unpredictable that when you have someone like Fernando who is really on the drive to push this car as far up the grid as possible, and Lance who's having a better season than he usually does, there is opportunities out there to make the points when Williams are having a bad run like they did in Spain. Alpine are knowing the question. But let's face it, are not going to be in the points every weekend. They had just a very exceptional race in Spain. The RB's kind of here and there. Hajar's, is usually there, but Lawson is kind of in and out at the moment. So there are opportunities to be made up. And so they just need to make it count when those opportunities come along.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, that midfield is very tight. Like the fight for basically eighth to, 14th, like is sometimes separated by, you know, barely like 10 seconds or so. But just looking at the points for those sets of teams, obviously Williams are a bit further ahead on 54 points, but B 28, Haas 26, Sauber 16, Aston 16, Alpine 11, like, any of those but like three or four teams, a decent result because of some retirements ahead, just getting the best out of your car on a particular weekend. You've jumped up a couple of places there and you've cost your rivals potentially quite a lot in sponsorship money and prize money at the end of the season, which going into 2026 as well with the new cars, the new regulations, and it's going to make all the difference really long term wise, particularly, we saw just how important it was to like start the regulations off in 2014 and things like that. But finally, before we move on to our predictions, let's talk about one or two, in this case, more teams. It's been a poor run of form for both Mercedes and Williams, with the former seemingly losing that bulletproof reliability they've shown over the course of the V6 turbo hybrid era. Mercedes have slipped to P3 in the constructors, and Williams, last year's Aston Martin, of being somewhat planted in P5. George, can these two recover the lost momentum in Canada?
I think it's definitely possible. I think this track will suit Williams a lot more. This is the kind of track that normally suits them quite well. I actually forgot, but George Russell got pole here last year as well. So, it should be a good track for Mercedes too. But yeah, the reliability is worrying. Everybody, kind of seems to be struggling with that Mercedes engine, apart from McLaren somehow. Despite Mercedes supplying their own engines, they seem to be very unreliable at the moment. Kimi Antonelli retiring twice out of the last three races because of mechanical issues. I mean, it was just a complete shut off. In Spain, it was like 1 second it's working, the next minute, nope, it's completely gone. Catastrophic failure there. Yeah, Williams have not had a good time with things in terms of the pace of the car. They did kind of warn us about that for Spain. They said it's not going to suit the track. It's always been a bit of a tricky track for them in terms of the technicality and everything. This is a much simpler track in terms of, being much more orientated towards the power, so the engine should make a good difference. But yeah, you're right. The unreliability is worrying, and I've checked the weather forecast. It's meant to be hot, not ridiculously hot by any means, but it's not going to be cool by any means. It's not going to be rainy like last year. So we could have some engines struggling in that. I mean, it's not unlike we're getting, to get DRS trains here down the long straights in Canada. The engines can very much overheat. The brakes as well. This is one of the toughest tracks of the year on brakes too. So it's gonna be difficult to control the temperatures of the cars. I do think they're going to be better in terms of their overall pace, but it's all about as well just being able to get to the finish because, yeah, Mercedes have lost the mystique. Over 10 years now in this V6 turbo hybrid era, they have had unquestionably usually the most powerful and pretty much always the most reliable engine. But not even halfway through the season, these teams are going to be taking a lot of engine penalties towards the end of the year. And that's if they don't get any more of these failures.
Yeah, exactly. And as you've mentioned already, the temperatures this weekend, Mercedes don't tend to work very well in the hotter temperatures. Over the ground effect era, they've performed best, and their peaks have come when the track's been cold, and they've been able to make the most of the fact that their car just doesn't work in those higher temperatures. But yeah, it's really worrying, this reliability issue. But hopefully, McLaren can continue to be the ones that are the exception to the rule because, they're going to be wanting to stay ahead. But I guess maybe that's what the FIA are hoping will eventually happen is that McLaren start falling victim to their engine suppliers' reliability woes so that, it brings the field back together a bit since the flexi wing experiment failed. And we're all about putting that level playing field in the meritocracy that is Formula One. But anyway, let's talk about some predictions. And this is certainly a meritocracy these days with the leadership board going on. George, I'm going to start with you. What's your pole position prediction for Canada?
Oh, just pole. I'm gonna go because yeah, we've seen on street tracks he's done well in qualifying in particular. I'm gonna go Lando Norris. I'm gonna go for him for pole position.
I mean, I'll carry on with you then. What's your podium prediction as well? And then chuck in something bold afterwards.
I did think it was weird. You just asked me for the
Look, sometimes
prediction
I do
there.
things sequentially, sometimes I do things one at a time. You just never know with me.
You're a free spirit. There's nothing wrong with Ruby, with that Ruby. Absolutely. So yeah, podium. I'm gonna go for McLaren 1-2. I'm gonna keep it. Yeah, I'm gonna go for Lando to keep pole. I'm gonna go for him to hold off Oscar. I'm being a bit brave with that, but we'll see what happens. And the final podium place. I mean, Verstappen's won here last 3 years. He's won here in general last 3 years before every other race. I don't know how he's gonna get on this weekend though. Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna play safe. I am gonna go for Verstappen for that final spot. It's gonna be tight. It's gonna be tough to say who's gonna get there, but I'm gonna go with him. I don't think Ferrari are quite consistent enough. Mercedes, even if they have a bit of a jump, I don't see them being there. Bold prediction time. I am gonna go with, I said Williams would be better this weekend. Let's back it up with a bold prediction. One of the Williams in the top five.
One of the Williams in the top five. Wow. Yeah, a bit of a safe, McLaren 1-2 pole position. And then obviously Max Verstappen on the third step as well. I'm definitely not calling out my own predictions here too. But Louis, what's your predictions, please? Pole position, podium, and something bold.
See, it's heart and head because every time I say Lando will do well, he never does. So, but ultimately, I want Lando to do well. So, pole position, I going to go with Oscar Piastri. I'm going to go with the other McLaren. And then with the podium, also McLaren 1-2, but I'm also going to go the opposite way to George. So it would be Piastri to win with Lando P2. And then P3, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go with Lewis. It's a track that he likes, and even when he's not having a great season, he usually runs well here. It's one of the kind of the three that he runs well at. Is well, kind of three or four. It's always Canada, Silverstone, Hungary, and like Interlagos. It's kind of his four tracks that, regardless of what season he's having, he usually runs well there. So I'm going to put Lewis P3. For my bold prediction, I'm going to go with the homegrown hero with his released wrists that will make him turn better and hopefully stay out the wall. I'm going to say Lance Stroll comfortably within Q3. Not none of this scraping in P10, anywhere between P6 to P9 area. That's where he'll be come the end of quali.
We're going to release the graphics for the predictions, and it's going to be breaking news. Lance Stroll replaced for the Canadian Grand Prix by insert driver here.
Not
And that,
Felipe Drugovich because Aston Martin hate him for some reason.
yeah, it won't be him. It won't be him, but, hilarious. This is not going to be a very varied predictions section, really, unfortunately, but that's just what happens when you're also trying to get some points on the board. Because my pole position is Oscar Piastri. My podium is Oscar Piastri P1, Lando Norris P2, and Max Verstappen P3, because you just can't deny that's the statistics of, 2022, 2023, 2024, always P1, always putting off the charging cars behind, regardless of how the season's going. Like, if anyone's going to be in P3, it's Max Verstappen. He's 2013's Fernando Alonso. But my bold prediction, tying back to the topic we were talking about earlier about the penalty points, is that Max Verstappen will pick up the penalty point that gets him the race ban, tying back to that whole point about how the FIA would do everything they could do to not give Kevin Magnussen the penalty point to give him a race ban last season. But What do you think's going to happen in the Canadian Grand Prix? Let us know in the comments below or over on our social media channels. And at this point in the podcast, we like to give something back. George, if people want to hear more from you, where can they find you?
Thank you, Ruby. Yeah, they can head over to Formula Reports on all the social medias. Just me talking about Formula One and all the good things going on. When this podcast goes out, I will have done a little conspiracy review about the 1989 Japanese Grand Prix. I've been doing some of them recently. I did Spain 2012 as well last weekend for Spain. Might do one for Canada this weekend coming up as well. I'm not sure if there's a big conspiracy around a Canadian Grand Prix, but I'll find something to talk about. If you want to hear more from me talk about Formula One, that's the place to go.
Yeah, I hear the internet's pretty big on conspiracy theories at this point, George, so that could work pretty well. Louis, anything you want to plug at this opportunity?
I've got a conspiracy theory. The Mercedes planted the seagulls that cost Sebastian the Vettel.
I thought they had
Right.
little silver stripes on them. Can't trust them.
Well, Lewis says in that famous interview afterwards that he told them to be there. So it's coming from the horse's mouth there. It's clear as day that he did it. Sir Lewis Doolittle Hamilton.
Is that Doolittle because of the reference or Doolittle because at the moment he's not doing much in that Ferrari?
It's a double entendre. It could be both. But no, the main place you can hear from me is here on this podcast, where I do occasionally, when the time zone permits, come on and give my opinion. But the main thing I would like you to check out is a new episode of Grill the Grid Talk, which has been released, the final episode for this season. I apologize, it took a little longer than it should, but it is out there. We have completed the season, and I've already written about half of the next season of Grill the Grid Talk. I look forward to grilling the hosts again next year. But yeah, it's a lot of fun to do. It's a really fun thing to be a part of this year. So make sure to check them out. The compilations for all the rounds will also be out at some time, or you can just go back and watch them all sequentially. Whatever gets more views on the videos. Thank you very much. But yes, please check them out.
Yes, absolutely. Please do go and check out Grill the Grid Talk. A lot of fun has been had, and you can play along at home, provided, we don't give the answers during the questions, which happened to me during one of the questions, as I will be honourable about. But if you want to hear more from me, I'm on Instagram and Threads at Ruby Rose Price, and I will also plug Grid Talk social channel since Owain's not here to do so. And you can find us on pretty much all of the social media channels at Grid Talk UK, and that's where you can see what's going on with our predictions league. It's where you can find out about our shows and our lineups before the shows are out and all of that jazz. So Grid Talk is available on YouTube as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Verbal and Pocket Casts. Just search for Formula One Grid Talk for our back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to the race results. Thank you to Jared Bradley and Holly Eagle for supporting us on Patreon. If you want to support the show further, why not sign up to our Patreon for exclusive content? And also make sure you subscribe to be the first to know when each new episode is released. And we'll be back soon with plenty more F1 content. Thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast, and goodbye.